Okay, welcome everyone. The fact that this lecture is on the schedule is a testament to the confidence that your faculty have that you have learned a lot over the course of the week. And that's because I'm going to get into a few technical matters in this lecture. You're ready for it though. You've got a great foundation as prepared by all of the lectures that you've attended, all the learning and reading that you've done. But this lecture is on equilibrium illusions. And I mean equilibrium in the broad sense, so you could also call it disequilibrium illusions. And it's also a good bookend to the first lecture of Mises University, which was given by Dr. Salerno, in which he was talking about the contributions of Menger, the birth of the Austrian School. And he was, during that lecture, he talked about the contributions of the classical school. And he said that one thing that they contributed, one thing that they discovered or helped us realize in this early development of economic theory is that prices are not arbitrary or random. They're determined by universal and unchangeable laws, including law of supply and demand. That there are profits and losses that business owners use to help them determine adjustments to production, helps the economic system economize the use of resources. Importantly, profits encourage businesses to increase supply of a profitable good and lure new businesses to enter the industry. Losses drive businesses to reduce supply of an unprofitable good or to cease production and exit the industry. And then we saw that there was this short run versus long run distinction. In the classical school, they like to talk about the long run a lot, and that's because it was easy to see that in the long run, the prices of goods would be brought into equilibrium with the prices and costs of production would equalize as a result of this profit and loss mechanism. But then he talked about what Menger did. And what Menger sought to do is he wanted to explain the real world. So as opposed to just focusing on this long run state where you have to bring in all of these assumptions about what occurs, what is held constant, all of that sort of thing, Dr. Salerno showed that Menger wanted to explain the real world. And he said, this is quoting Menger, I've devoted special attention to the investigation of the causal connections between economic phenomena involving products and the corresponding agents of production, not only for the purpose of establishing a price theory based on reality and placing all price phenomena together under one unified point of view. And he continues on. The idea that you should get from this is that Menger was trying to explain the real world that did result in, at least later on in the development of Austrian economic theory, that did result in the development of different equilibrium constructs. And the goal of this lecture is to present these different equilibrium constructs to you, explain their nature, what results happen after some particular form of equilibrium is established. But first, what I want to dispel this idea that we explain markets this way. So here's standard Marshallian supply and demand. We've got upward sloping supply, downward sloping demand, equilibrium price and quantity, the market clears. And then there's this increase in the demand for the good, we'll say, just suppose there's an increase in demand. And as a result of this increase in demand, at the existing price of the good, we have excess demand. So you see quantity demanded is way off to the right. Quantity supplied is where it was before. And so for some reason, temporarily, momentarily, something hasn't changed yet. The price is temporarily stuck at this old price. And then the way that this price changes, the way that it increases up to the new, what we know would be the equilibrium values with this wash of spending that comes in because of the excess demand. A lot of buyers want to get this good, so there's spending, and this causes the price to increase up to the new equilibrium price and quantity. This is wrong. Do not think about market changes this way. Don't think about going from one equilibrium to the next in this way. We cannot explain the movement of a price based on excess demand or excess supply. So here's how you should think about it. First of all, notice I've made the supply curve vertical. So we're ignoring changes in supply. We'll hold that for later in the presentation. So we just got some total stock of the good that's being offered for sale, and we have demand for the good. And that results in a market clearing price and quantity combination there at P star, Q star. Then one person has a change in their marginal utility for the good, and they offer a higher price. So they have an increase in demand, and the way that we think about an increase in demand is through changes in marginal utility, through a change in their preference ranking. And when they offer that higher price, and that price is accepted by the seller, they agree on this new price, and we have a new market clearing plain state of rest. That's a plain state of rest in which there's no more transactions given the preferences and information and expectations that market participants have. They transact at this higher price. It's a step-by-step process. So suppose somebody else increases their demand, higher marginal utility for the good or lower marginal utility for money. There's some change in their preference ranking, and this results in another double coincidence of wants between this new buyer and the seller of the good, and they transact at a higher price. Another market clearing plain state of rest. And this can go on until if you're talking about a change in demand that was caused by something general, so multiple people experience this phenomenon, they change their demands for the good, they end up at this new point. We can call it another sort of equilibrium, but what I want to stress to you is that as we go from one price to the next, we still have these market clearing stopping points. It's a step-by-step process by which we go from one market clearing equilibrium to another equilibrium, but there's market clearing along the way. Notice what I used to explain the changes was a change in preferences, change in marginal utilities for the good and for money, or for money, right? Either one. I did not resort to an excess demand for the good, because if there's an excess demand for the good, it means that the market is not clearing. It means that the quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied. But we know from the logic of the plain state of rest, the way people transact in the market, when both people decide to exchange, and they both prefer the good that's offered by the other person, and they trade, that the market clears. The quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. So these step-by-step stopping points show these market clearing plain states of rest along the way to the new equilibrium. Okay, so I just wanted to get that out of the way to show you like where I'm coming from as I'm going through these different equilibrium constructs. Okay, so this is something that was important for Mises. At the beginning of my talk on the division of labor, I said the division of labor was very important for Mises. So was economic calculation, structured production. You know what else was important? Equilibrium. And they say so in the introduction written by Salerno, Herbener, and Hoppe. They say, retrospectively describing his purpose in writing National Economie, Mises left no doubt that he sought to address the two burning issues left unresolved by the founders of the Austrian School, the status of the equilibrium construct and the bifurcation of monetary and value theory. And they quote Mises, I try in my treatise to consider the concept of static equilibrium as instrumental only, and to make use of this purely hypothetical abstraction only as a means of approaching an understanding of a continuously changing world. So one thing that I see among some Austrians is that they want to discard this idea of equilibrium altogether. They want to say that everything is always changing, and so we should discard this use of equilibrium. But then others have retained the idea, and I think that it is okay to retain the idea as long as we understand what we mean by equilibrium, what is established, what is left over with the attainment of each type of equilibrium, and that helps us explain the real world. And so Mises shows that we can use some of these hypothetical abstractions to explain the tendencies underlying market participants as they go from one equilibrium to the next, making production changes, for example. That helps us explain where the market is going. However, in the process, Mises actually gave us an equilibrium construct that is not hypothetical. He gave us, as I've already mentioned, the plain state of rest, or the PSR for short. That PSR is the plain state of rest that occurs after every transaction. Okay, what do we see outside of the Austrian School? We see a bunch of junk. We see a bunch of different equilibrium constructs that are based on different market conditions, numbers of sellers. Are we talking about the macroeconomy or the microeconomy, one particular industry, all of these different things, and it's a mess. I'll just say it's a mess. It's not there's no logical coherence. There's no necessary connections between these two or between different equilibrium constructs. I mean, for some there are, but others there are not. And also it leads to what Professor Di Lorenzo mentioned as the nirvana fallacy. So a lot of times they'll hold up one particular equilibrium construct, the perfect competition ideal, and they'll say that if we're ever away from this, it means that we're lacking in total welfare, and therefore we can say this outcome that exists in this market is wrong, bad. We could be at the perfect competition equilibrium and have greater total welfare. So all of those are based on interactions of optimizing agents. They consider agents as like these utility maximizers, or in the case of firms, profit maximizers in a mathematical sort of way. And then for the macro models, they just say that they take a representative household, or like one particular consumer that represents all consumers, or a representative firm, for example. And so here I've given you, here's a typical example of how they think about monopoly, where the monopolist sets the quantity based on equating marginal revenue and marginal cost, but then they price up at the demand curve. And then you could see, well, if there weren't a monopoly, then the price would be where the marginal cost curve intersects the demand curve. And so there we can see, look at that red triangle there. We're losing out on welfare. So this is just a bad way to go about it. Okay, so what is the Austrian approach to equilibrium? When is the real world in equilibrium? And the answer is always and never. It depends on which form of equilibrium you're talking about. Where always, with each realized transaction that occurs, we always see a plain state of rest. But if we're talking about something like the final state of rest, that requires production adjustments to remaining anticipated areas where we can obtain profits or incur losses, if we're talking about production adjustments based on that, it means that we're never in equilibrium. So we never get to the final state of rest. We obviously never get to the evenly rotating economy. So we're never in those sorts of equilibria, but we are always in a PSR, or each transaction represents a PSR. And there's one more that I'll introduce, the Wickstedian state of rest, that is realizable, something that we can obtain that's based on the elimination of arbitrage opportunities, an interspatial equalization of prices. So equilibrium is always and never, repeatedly established and continually tending toward an FSR, for example. Each change in market conditions sets in motion a sequence of endogenous changes towards an ultimate state in which there are no more changes, an evenly rotating economy. So this ERE would be an example of the hypothetical or abstract equilibrium construct that Mises uses to help explain the real world, even though we never get to the ERE, and we'll see the purpose of it later on. Okay, so here's the different constructs. First of all, Mises talks about a state of rest that applies for all action. And this is just good methodology. If we're going to talk about the way people interact in markets, people interacting with one, like the social economy, the first thing we should do is make sense of the personal economy. And in the personal economy, there is a state of rest. So like each time you act, after the completion of the action, and before the next moment, the next action you take, there's a state of rest. So there's some felt uneasiness that urges you to act. There's something that you're not happy with about your current state of affairs. You act to change it, and then after that action takes place, you have this state of rest, the completion of the action. But then we have the plain state of rest that refers to the same sort of state of rest, but between traders in the market. They realize that there's this double coincidence of wants. They can trade for mutual benefit. After the trade occurs, they're in a plain state of rest. They've exhausted all possible mutually beneficial exchanges, very importantly, based on the knowledge and expectations, information that they have at the moment of the exchange. Then there's the Wickstedian state of rest. This is also a realizable, something that we can see in the real world, equilibrium in which we have the law of one price holding, where after a PSR, there can be price differences, and based on those price differences, people will change their supplies and demands. They'll buy from the low price seller, and they won't buy from the high price seller, or the high price seller might even change their prices, decrease their prices to get closer to what they see somebody else selling the good. And based on this equalization tendency and the realization of it, Philip Wicksteed referred to that as a state of rest, and so it's been called the Wicksteedian state of rest. At the Wicksteedian state of rest, we can have profit and loss. So it could be that the prices of the factors of production have not totally adjusted. So it could be that there's a way some producer decides, at this WSR, I have the opportunity to earn even higher profits by producing more. It would be profitable for me to produce more. So they bring additional quantity to the market, and that's explaining the ultimate tendency of prices, this FSR idea of production changes happening as a result of differences between output prices and input prices and profitable production that can be undertaken. And then we have the evenly rotating economy, which is like another step forward. If we think about an economy in which all prices are final prices, so all factors of production are earning their discounted marginal revenue product, and no person is anticipating any changes. Well, that doesn't even make any sense. Everybody knows the future perfectly. We get this Groundhog Day of the repeating economy. And so this has its own purpose, specifically in distinguishing between interest and profit. We could talk about why people hold on to money by using the ERE concept and so on. Okay, so what does Mises say about this first kind of state of rest? He says the only method of dealing with the problem of action is to conceive that action ultimately aims at bringing about a state of affairs in which there is no longer any action, whether because all uneasiness has been removed or because any further removal of felt uneasiness is out of the question. Action thus tends toward a state of rest, the absence of action. So by acting, you're aiming for this state in which you don't need to act anymore. So this is sort of like the tendency. Of course, this ultimate state of no action never occurs, but it's what we're aiming towards. By acting, we're trying to eliminate these value differentials. We're trying to achieve a better state of affairs. And in that better state of affairs, comparing to the one that we're currently in, we don't need to act in this future one that we're trying to achieve. We do need to act in this one. And so that's what Mises means by we're aiming for the situation in which we don't need to act. Okay, the plain state of rest. So here we have traders. Mises says in Human Action, people keep on exchanging on the market until no further exchange is possible because no party expects any further improvement of his own conditions from a new act of exchange. So no more transactions take place. The market clears. Quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. This is not an imaginary construction, Mises says. It comes to pass again and again. So after every single transaction, we can say that there is a plain state of rest established. And this has some very important implications in describing how markets work, because it means we're at least in one form of equilibrium all the time. So like I said, the market clears. This occurs repeatedly. And very importantly, the PSR prices reflect momentary. So this is a moment by moment, a step by step sort of thing that happens. Momentary valuations. There's no implication of constancy. We're not assuming, we're not assuming that people know more than they actually do. There are no assumptions built into this. We're basically just deducing from the logic of action the fact that if the exchange takes place means that the trades exhaust all known mutually beneficial trades, and so we can say the market clears. Okay, the Wicksteedian state of rest occurs because after a PSR is established, we can have these interspatial and intertemporal price discrepancies, differences in prices across space and time. Salerno talks about this in a 2010, the book was published in 2010, Money, Sound, and Unsound. The article is Ludwig von Mises' Monetary Thought in Light of Modern Monetary Thought. He's not referring to MMT, it's just talking about the state of monetary theory at the time. And so there's a great description of this PSR, WSR, FSR, and even some mention of the ERE in that article. It's in Money, Sound, and Unsound. So he says that these PSR prices can be false prices. They're not false in the sense that they don't occur or that they're meaningless. They're false in the sense that the valuations that people have and the bids that they make could be based on incorrect speculations, incorrect assumptions about other people's demands, other people's supplies. So you can have incomplete foresight. He says both buyers and sellers arrange the temporal pattern of their exchanges according to speculative anticipations of the course of actual market prices. So these momentary stopping points, these momentary prices, the PSR prices, are based on incomplete knowledge. There's no assumption of extra knowledge or information in order to achieve this kind of equilibrium, the PSR. But in the Wickstedian state of rest, we can have price differences and people notice them, and then they act to eliminate them. They act to buy low and sell high. Okay, so here's an example. I'll walk through an example with you. There's a farmer named Adam. He brings his apples to market with the ultimate intention of selling all of them. He wants to get rid of his inventory. He seeks to maximize his revenue by the end of the market day. He writes $5 per apple on a sign and notices people walking by his stand without purchasing. Why is that? Well, they see another farmer, Bob will say, selling apples at $3 per apple. So Adam thinks at $5 per apple, I won't sell any. Maybe if Bob runs out of apples, people will purchase mine, but I don't think I'll sell that many after Bob runs out. So he's thinking maybe I should change my price to increase my revenue. Bob, however, thinks I can afford to increase my price from $3 to maybe $4 per apple. Since Adam is selling his for $5, I can increase my revenue. So Bob is thinking, wow, Adam over there is selling his apples for such a high price, I can afford to increase my price and still attract all of the demand to my fruit stand. So I've got some clock time here, just to explain what might happen. There's nothing in the theory that says that these things occur over 1 hour intervals or hour and a half interval. In fact, that's why I threw in the 10:30 in there, just to make sure nobody thought this has to happen over the course of 1 hour. But just to show over the course of the day, Adam starts at $5 per apple, Bob starts at $3. Based on the price difference, they both change the prices that they post at their stand. Adam comes down to $3, Bob goes up to $4. So in this case, Bob made an incorrect guess. He actually overpriced Adam by making this change. He didn't know that Adam was going to do that, perhaps. And so now there's another price discrepancy. And now maybe by the time 10:30, 11 rolls around, they start to anticipate the other's changes. They start to think, hey, every time I change my price, it seems like Bob or Adam the other person is doing something else. And so based on the price discrepancy here, I can start to guess what they might do. And you can see over the course of the market day, they end up at price equalization. Now, one thing that I've kept constant here, just to make it a simple explanation, is demand. So I'm not talking about demanders really changing things, but just to show you that there is this tendency for price equalization to happen, even with just sellers setting their own prices at their fruit stand. But you could also imagine this would be sped up, this would happen faster if demanders perhaps see the price discrepancy and they buy from the low price area and sell at the high price area. And then you get faster equalization that way. So this is how we achieve a Wickstedian state of rest, just as was established by me and Ryan Turnipseed the other day, because we equalized the clothes that we were wearing. So the Wickstedian states of rest eliminate interspatial and intertemporal price discrepancies, but profit and loss remain. So now I'm starting to explain how we get into a final state of rest. We don't actually get to a final state of rest, but what remains in the Wickstedian state of rest is this profit and loss spurs on additional changes in production. So anticipations of profit and loss remain, and that spurs producers to alter their production decisions. In the meantime, producers continue to test the market. So we still, the PSRs happen all of the time, step by step by step. There's PSRs all of the time. If we see price equalization, then we can say that a Wickstedian state of rest was achieved. But all through the time, we have PSRs. So there's a continuation of testing of the market where producers are trying to learn about the extent of total demand for the good that they're selling. They're learning about what other producers might bring to market. They're learning about how other producers will respond to price changes. So there's this testing of the market that continues. Here's how Salerno explains this mechanism or this tendency towards the final state of rest. He says the emergence of profits and losses impels entrepreneurs to immediately begin revising purchase, sale, and production decisions, and so to drive the economy through a series of temporary states of rest toward a final position of full adjustment and zero profits. Unlike the WSR, which is closely approximated in actually prevailing market conditions, at any point of historical time, the economy is always far from reaching the FSR. The FSR only indicates the direction of movement of the historical market process at any moment. So the FSR is not a realizable equilibrium. We do not reach the FSR. And the reason why is because the nature of production changes and all of the different production changes that take place, these will take longer than other things. Other things will change before that is achieved, right? So changes in supplies and demands, preferences, all of these things will change before an FSR is reached. Okay, so here's our PSR. We ended up with the WSR. And so we'll say, going back to Adam and Bob, there's differences in profits. Adam speculates that Bob has higher costs, but will still bring additional apples to market the next day. Each producer makes a judgment about the total stock that will be brought to market and the total demand for apples. And they start the next day by testing the market once again. Price discrepancies are eliminated over the course of the market day. Once again, it does not have to be a 24-hour period or a 4-hour period as I've shown it. It just depends on the sequence of things that are taking place. Price discrepancies are eliminated. Profitable production is eliminated over the course of multiple market days. So each market day, there's an equalization that happens, a WSR that occurs, law of one price. But each day they think, or they realize profits and they have anticipations about how I can have higher profits the next day or how I can avoid the losses that I just earned by changing how many apples I bring to market. So they make changes in how much they produce. So Adam and Bob, they consult their apple producing technology. How fruitful is my orchard? How productive is my orchard? How much does it cost me to pay laborers to pluck the apples from the trees and so on? How much does it cost me to bring apples to market? And based on these production changes, as a result of profit and loss, they tend towards, we'll just say $3.75 is the final state of rest. It's again not realizable. It's not something that would ever occur because in the between time, we'd have changes in preferences. We'd have changes in all sorts of things, the total stocks of other goods. But the idea is that this explains the tendency of the market towards a final state of rest. So with each day, they're bringing a different quantity to market. They have updated ideas about the extent of total demand. They change the prices that they pay for their factors of production. This results in new WSRs at the end of each day. Once they get to the point where all of their factors of production are earning their exact DMRP, discounted marginal revenue product, then we can say they've reached a final state of rest. And although Salerno says that we never get to a final state of rest, it sure seems like he got to it when I was giving my presentation on the division of labor. It's a nice... Okay, so here's what Mises said about how we explain the tendency of the market towards this FSR. He said, so he's actually starting with the PSR. He's explaining PSRs on the way to the FSR. He sort of skipped over the WSR. But he said from the PSR, he says, now we go a step further. We pay attention to the factors which are bound to bring about a tendency towards price changes. Skipping down a little bit, he talks about the naming of it. This final state of rest is an imaginary construction, not a description of reality, for the final state of rest will never be attained. New disturbing factors will emerge before it will be realized. What makes it necessary to take recourse to this imaginary construction is the fact that the market at every instant is moving toward a final state of rest. Every later new instant can create new facts altering this final state of rest. But the market is always disquieted by a striving after a definite final state of rest. Okay, so it's something that we don't achieve, but we can understand the tendency within the market to go towards a final state of rest based on the elimination of profit, based on production changes that occur because of the existence of profit and avoiding losses. Okay, now how about the evenly rotating economy? So this is one that's like so imaginary, so hypothetical that you can't even think about it too long without your brain melting. It's like this, and Mises talks, he doesn't say brain melting, but he says like you can't take the ERE to like any sort of logical conclusion. It's something that we use for very particular purposes And the purposes are to distinguish between interest and profit. What happens if we get rid of all uncertainty? Well, then people wouldn't have demand for money. They would just use interest earning assets that mature as soon as they know that they're going to need the purchasing power to buy some planned expenditure. And so like there's all sorts of weird things that happen, but it helps us figure out entrepreneurship is the bearing of uncertainty. Profit is a result of the existence of uncertainty. We demand money because of uncertainty. All of these sorts of things are why the evenly rotating economy is useful. He says the imaginary construction of the final state of rest is marked by paying full regard to a change in the temporal succession of events. In this respect, it differs from the imaginary construction of the evenly rotating economy, which is characterized by the elimination of change. So there's your difference between the FSR and the ERE. ERE is like FSR on steroids. We've achieved FSR and there's no more uncertainty about anything. No more disturbing changes ever occur. And like I said, it's used for very particular purposes. Okay, so here's a quick summary. Plain state of rest, market clears. Is it realistic? Does it apply to the real world? Yes. We do achieve the PSR in the real world. And why do we have it? It helps us explain real world prices. So Menger actually had this idea of the PSR in his writings. He talked about the market clearing aspect of exchanges. He didn't call it the PSR. That came later. Mises used the term PSR. But it's Mises's use of the PSR was based on the projects started by Menger, as Salerno pointed out in his first lecture of this week. What was Menger trying to do? He was trying to explain cause and effect and the real world. So that's why sometimes Austrian economics is referred to as causal realism or causal realist economics. Okay, the Wickstedian state of rest, this is where the arbitrage opportunities are exploited. There's different prices, people see them, people act to eliminate them. They buy low, sell high. And those actions work to bring prices to equality. So we get the law of one price holding, interspatial price equalization, that occurs. And that is also realistic. That's something that can occur. We can see prices equate. We see two vendors selling the same good for the same price. And we can say that for those two vendors with those two different areas, interspatial, right, we have a price equality. Okay, what about the FSR? Here, this is where we talk about production adjustments. We talk about factors earning their discounted marginal revenue product. Not realistic, but still helpful to explain the tendency of the market. And so that's why we can use it. It's not something that's achieved, but it helps us explain why do producers change production the way that they do? Why do they change their bids for different factors of production? And that's because they're aiming towards an FSR. Maybe not consciously, but that tendency, the mechanisms by which profit and loss are eliminated is explained in that moving towards the FSR state. And the evenly rotating economy, that's where we have no change, no uncertainty, everything repeats, not realistic. And the reason we use this is to help us explain the source of profit and loss, money demand, interest. Interest remains in the ERE because time passes. It's a weird sort of time because there's no uncertainty. Don't think about it or your brain will melt. Okay, so now let me turn to some applications to this. So some people, like I said, they're eager to diagnose a disequilibrium in the market clearing sense. So they say the market's not clearing. And some of the evidence for that, they'll point to unsold inventory, they'll refer to stockouts that occur. By the way, I do think that we can have excess demand or excess supply, but only in the case of a price control. Only if you have a price floor or price ceiling do we have excess supply and excess demand. Otherwise, all voluntary trades, all the trades that happen in the unhampered market economy, we can say, as a matter of fact, the market clears for those trades. However, the people who are eager to diagnose disequilibrium, they sometimes point to like strange bits of evidence. They'll say price changes reflect disequilibrium because the market is not settled. But we've shown how over the course of the day, the price can change, but with each one of those PSR stopping points, the market is clearing. But a lot of people, this is very common, a lot of people refer to price stickiness, sticky prices, sticky wages, and they'll say that this reflects disequilibrium. So a price not changing means that we're in disequilibrium because the market is not adjusting to changes in prices. And I'll show you an example of how we can explain a price not changing, even after a change in demand, is the example that I have, that still shows that in both the before and after we have market clearing. So the conclusion is that a proper understanding reveals that all realized prices are market clearing plain states of rest, but arbitrage and production adjustments may continue. Okay, so here's George Selgin talking about sticky prices. He says, several obstacles stand in the way of instantly equilibrating general price changes. First among them are fixed money contracts that cannot be easily indexed to general price movements. The reason he's talking about general price changes, general price movements, is because he's thinking about this in terms of monetary equilibrium, monetary disequilibrium. We'll just set that aside for now. Actually, for the whole, I'm not going to talk about monetary disequilibrium theory in this lecture. But we'll still talk about what does he mean by fixed contracts and how can that impede market clearing. He continues, such contracts include both wage contracts and nominal debt contracts. Second, menu costs and other expenses involved in posting and sometimes negotiating new money prices can make the price level sticky in the short run. Finally, sellers may be reluctant to change, and especially to lower their prices in response to monetary disequilibrium, even when the fixed costs of doing so are small. So I'll take these in order. Actually, I'll group menu costs and reluctance together. But regarding fixed contracts, if a buyer and a seller, I'll do a wage contract. If an employee and an employer make a contract together that says, I'll work for this price, this wage, and I promise to perform these duties, and I'll show up for these hours, and the employer says, I'll pay you X amount that you work per hour, the market clears with the signing of the contract. When both parties agree to the contract, the market clears. And what they're exchanging are promises. They're saying, I promise to fulfill these duties, work these hours. The employer is saying, I promise to pay you this wage, $15, we'll say, per hour that you work. So the market clears. Now, when this employee shows up to work a month later, we'll say, and they work a certain number of hours and the employer pays them the wage that they promised, that wage is not a market price. That is not a market wage. That is a fulfillment of terms that were agreed upon at the beginning of the contract. Like when the contract was established, the market cleared. The promises were traded and the market cleared. All of the payments and the labor that's provided afterwards, these are just fulfillments of those original terms. So there's actually nothing that could happen later on that would pose a problem for market clearing. And this is something that William H. Hutt described and Salerno summarized. And so this is a quote from Salerno's article, The Concept of Coordination in Austrian Macroeconomics. He says, such prices, talking about prices fixed by contract, this would apply to debt contracts as well, do not constitute rigid market prices that distort the allocation of resources. In fact, in the instant after they are contractually established, prices governing future transactions lose the character and function of market prices and begin to operate merely as terms upon which speculative gains and losses resulting from fluctuations of spot prices are distributed between buyers and sellers, and so on. So what's the point? So suppose there is an increase in the demand for labor in the middle of this contracted period. Well, then that might mean gains and losses for the different parties involved. So changes in supply and demand, changes in spot prices will result in gains and losses for the people who made that original contract. But those gains and losses, this is not the same thing as like a deadweight loss associated with a price control. This is just entrepreneurial error that's realized, or entrepreneurial gains that's realized ex post, right? So we've cleared the market, made the contract. Things happen things change that we don't anticipate. The market's still cleared. Things changing later doesn't impact the fact that the market's still cleared. But now these changes might make me really regret the contract that I went into, or really like the fact that I went into the contract the way that I did. But it poses no problem for market clearing. Okay, so what about menu costs and reluctance to change? So this is how sticky wages are typically depicted in, intro classes and in textbooks. In fact, this is from Marginal Revolution University, one of their videos. So they have this, suppose there's a decrease in demand for labor, but there's a sticky wage, and this results in unemployment. So the quantity supplied of labor exceeds quantity demanded at that stuck wage. And the reasons they give for this sticky wage include things like people are reluctant to accept a lower wage. Now, what's the problem with that? If they're reluctant to accept the lower wage, it means that the supply curve is not shaped like this. You have to account for their reluctance to accept a pay decrease in their preferences, in the different wages, in the different amounts of labor that they would supply at different wages. So you had to bake the reluctance into the pie. Same thing with menu costs, by the way. If menu costs operate through the filter of the seller's preferences. So if I'm a seller and I see that there's high menu costs, it's going to cost me a lot of money to change my prices. That just means that's going to flatten my supply curve. I'm going to allow different amounts of inventory to be left over. I'm going to change how much I'm offering to sell since it's costly for me to change my price. But the point is that it changes the shapes of the curves. So menu costs and reluctance, these are supposed to already be baked into the supply and demand schedules. It's not something that's like an external constraint on the market that's preventing it from clearing. So I propose this as a different way of thinking about it. So if people are reluctant to accept a pay decrease, if this is a market for labor, it means that they have like this, it's a voluntary minimum wage. It's not a minimum wage that's imposed by the government. It's a person saying, I'm not going to accept a penny less. If you offer to pay me less than this, where this flat section occurs, then I'm just going to withdraw from the market entirely. I'm going to decrease the quantity of labor I supply by a lot or even completely, right? So that's how we would explain that reluctance to accept a wage decrease. Same thing with menu costs, by the way. Okay, so what's the difference? Like you might be thinking, here you go from this point to this point, and Dr. Newman, you just showed us a graph that goes from this point to this point. The difference is the market is clearing here. There is no excess supply, excess demand. The market is clearing. Whereas in the other case, we had excess supply or unemployment in the labor market. Okay. Last thing I'll show you here. This is a graph of total stock and total demand analysis. And so I was thinking about, what about this objection where, sometimes at the end of the day, vendors have extra stuff on the shelves and they didn't change the price. So what explains that? Or maybe they run out of inventory. So couldn't we say that there's excess demand in the case of running out of inventory? Or couldn't we say that there's excess supply in the case of unsold inventory at the end of the day? And I would say no. And here's why. So this is total stock, total demand analysis. If you're interested in going through all of the details, I would refer you to Man, Economy, and State. Rothbard uses this to explain prices. But we have reservation demand, is that first one on the left. This is supply. This is suppliers' preferences to reserve or hold on to the good at different prices. So they're wanting to hold on to different amounts of the good at different prices, and that's their reservation demand. So the people who own the good, and they want to hold on to it, that's reservation demand. Exchange demand, these are the people who don't have the good, but would like to purchase it, and they'll purchase different quantities at different prices. That's exchange demand. And then we have total demand is the sum of all of them. So the first one is TD1 is the dotted line, dotted black line. I should say dashed black line. That's the sum of reservation and exchange demand. And we also have total stock of the good. So we have a given total stock of the good that exists at any given moment. At any given moment, we have a reservation demand schedule and exchange demand schedule. Okay, so that first equilibrium occurs at EQ1. Notice that's on the left-hand kink of total. We got kinky demand in here. We got the left-hand kink of this total demand curve. And that the reason why that kink is there is because there's a flat section of reservation demand. So what does that mean? Dr. Newman explained this in like words that I can understand. What that means is that there's no more unsold inventory. There's a stock out. That flat section of the reservation demand curve, that shows that's like Walmart putting stuff on the shelves and they put a price there And instead of negotiating new prices with every single customer that walks in, they just leave this stuff out there with the posted price, and they allow customers to decide how many units of this would you like to purchase at this price. And at the end of the day, if there's some left over, that's a part of Walmart's reservation demand for the good. If there's none left over, it means that their customers have exhausted all of their inventory. But the point is, there's never an excess supply or excess demand. What occurs is, at the end of the day, all of the good goes to the people who are the most capable sellers. At the end of the day, actually with each sale, we have an equality between total stock and total demanded. Okay, then there's a decrease in demand. After the decrease in demand, notice they keep the price the same. So what I'm doing is I'm explaining what might give the appearance of a sticky price. But this is just Walmart not changing the price and allowing customers to not purchase all of their inventory. So they keep the price the same. At the end of the day, Walmart has some stuff on the shelves, but they kept the price the same. That unsold inventory is not excess supply, it's reservation demand on the part of the vendors, in this case, Walmart. And so everything is still equilibrating in the PSR sense, and we never have excess supply, excess demand. At this point, I've achieved a presentation state of rest. Thank you.